remote working is more common than ever before. With millions of us across the globe working from our spare rooms or dining room tables, the lines between working hours and downtime are becoming increasingly blurred. Far too often, we find ourselves replying to one last email or finishing one last task far after our working day has ended, when we'd otherwise have left the office and begun our commute home. Not only that, but working in certain industries can mean long working hours, often away from home, meaning the downtime you do have is far less than the average 9 to 5. You'll often hear people talking of the importance of a healthy work-life balance, yet according to a survey by the Mental Health Foundation, more than 40% of employees are neglecting other aspects of their life because of work. A poor work-life balance can make your performance drop, dramatically decrease your level of job satisfaction, and have a profound negative effect on your mental health, potentially leading to burnout. So how do we tackle this? How do we as employees ensure our work-life balance means we get the best out of our job and our downtime? And how can companies take steps to ensure their employees are looked after? Hello and welcome to NES Chat, the recruitment podcast with me, Matt Nicholson. NES Chat provides key recruitment and industry insights into the oil and gas, chemical, power and renewable energy, mining and life science industries, as well as providing the technical personnel that serve them with career advice from our dedicated experts. Today, we're chatting with Lauren Edwards, Head of Marketing at NES Fircroft, and no stranger to balancing the demanding job with a day-to-day life. We'll be discussing tips to help manage a good work-life balance, to get the best out of your job and your downtime, as well as exploring ways in which companies can ensure their employees have enough time to switch off from work. Hi Lauren, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, how important is it to you to have a good work-life balance?
Oh, it's essential. You can't expect to bring your A game to your career if you're burnt out, if you're burning the candle at both ends. Like, my career is super important to me. I'm not just saying that, it genuinely does mean a lot to me, but first and foremost, I'm a person with friends, family and hobbies. You know, my career is not the be all and end all of my life. Before I'm head of marketing, I'm Lauren with a life outside of work, and I think people need to hold on to that. And it's not, just for me personally, I want my team to have a good work-life balance, because if they're arriving every day miserable, feeling overworked, it's not a recipe for success. I want people to enjoy working here, and you spend so much of your life at work. If you haven't got a balance, you will just have a miserable existence. So it's imperative to me.
So what is your experience with work-life balance? Is it something you feel you're quite good at managing? Do you find your job to be quite demanding? Tell us about that a bit.
I'm definitely better at it now, and I think that's come with experience. Typically, when you're trying to build your career as well, maybe even if you're a little bit younger, I think it can be a little bit, you feel like you have to put all of your time and energy into your career, and you can get quite blindsided and not really take time out and think about yourself. I'm a little bit better at that now, I like to think, but my job is demanding, particularly my remit personally, it's global. So if I didn't take time out, I could technically be on call 24/7. And obviously that's just not sustainable, nobody can do that. So I do have to set boundaries and parameters to make sure that I stay efficient and, useful to people. It can be difficult, especially when you're trying to make sure that you are accessible to your colleagues. And it's not just my colleagues, I actually have reporting lines in different continents. So that can be a challenge, making sure that I'm, providing the support that they need to keep things moving smoothly. But I think we're in a good place with it now. Another thing that can be quite difficult sometimes is switching off from work. So obviously in my role, there are some quite big decisions to be made sometimes, and I'm painfully aware that I can't please everyone all of the time. And sometimes things can stay with you long after your working day is done. But again, it's about trying to put some boundaries, some parameters in place. And for me, I like to think there's, dare I say, an intelligent argument behind why I might have made a decision, and as long as I'm being fair about it, I try and give myself a break and just accept that you can't please everyone all the time.
So if somebody starts to suspect that they have a poor work-life balance, what can they do to identify it?
A big red flag for me personally and for my team members is overreaction. If something mildly inconvenient happens and you're ready to blow and you've just had enough, I think that's a very good indicator that you're probably feeling overworked at that moment in time, and just stress. It's not a guarantee, but from experience, that is often kind of the cause. So if that happens, first of all, never react to anything off the cuff. Give yourself a little bit of a chance to just breathe, think things through, and you're always going to get a more constructive and positive outcome from having taken that time away from the situation. I think if someone is constantly finding themselves thinking about work, even when they're not at work, that's another indicator that maybe things aren't quite as balanced as what they could be, because, there is time in the day to work, but obviously you need to give yourself a mental break from that as well. And if someone constantly finds themselves reaching for their work phone to check their emails, if they're finding the need to catch up on things outside of the normal working hours, or if it's coming to kind of the end of their working day and they're thinking, oh, I'll just do this, I'll just do that, I'll just do this, and then they've spent another hour and a half kind of trying to tidy tasks up, then I think it's time to reassess and ask yourself why you're feeling the need to do that. Is it because you've got, deadlines stacked up and you can't cope, or is it just that you're trying to just churn your way through things unnecessarily and making life more difficult for yourself, really? So if people do find themselves in these kinds of scenarios, I think it's good to ask yourself, am I actually spending any time developing my own interests and my own hobbies outside of work? Like, what am I actually doing to distract my mind from the corporate life? Am I doing anything to give myself a break? Have I got any interests or passions I want to pursue?
So once you've identified an issue with work-life balance, how would you recommend someone start setting those boundaries?
I think it all depends on, what your role is. So if you've got a manager, which, most people do, it all starts with an open and honest conversation about why you might be struggling, why you might be finding something difficult. I mean, self-reflection is definitely part of that journey, because there could be a number of factors at play, like maybe, people need a bit more support with time management. Maybe we should look at upskilling somebody to make them a bit more efficient in what they're doing. But genuinely, there could be a case where there is too much on their plate and we might need to delegate, reassess, reprioritize. But you can't expect things to get better if you're not going to have a conversation with the person who can help you to make things better. So I would definitely recommend having a conversation with your manager to begin with. And I would also take a look at your own personal habits as well. So there's simple but constructive things you can do to help cut yourself off if you really are struggling to just move on from your working day. I, for example, have a work phone and a personal phone. I can physically put my work phone in a room, close the door, and forget about it. And naturally, that depends on what's going on at the time. Sometimes there are urgent deadlines. That is the nature of the beast. You can't always just forget about things just because we're past 5 o'clock. But it is not healthy if you are constantly reaching for your phone, wanting to check in on emails, because like I said, we're a 24 global business. So there's always something happening, but that doesn't mean I always need to be on tap like that. So I do physically put my phone away, give myself a break. I personally opted to keep a personal phone in addition to having a work phone, because I didn't want the access to having work emails constantly. I think it can sometimes be a bit of an unhealthy temptation for people, just so that they're staying in the loop and feeling like they're keeping on top of things. So by having your work completely separate from your personal life, again, it just makes it easier to kind of put it down and walk away from it and give yourself an actual proper break from that. Same with, people, if you're working from home and your laptop is constantly there, like in your eye line, at least make sure you're shutting it down and it's not just open, kind of whirring away in the background. I think taking physical steps to remove yourself from a working context can go a long way. It can be a bit habitual for people, so if they are reaching for their phone first thing in the morning and before they've even got out of bed or had a coffee, they're reading through emails, not good. That's not how you want to be starting your day. Same with, just checking it before you go to bed. Well, no, how are you going to wind down if you're suddenly looking at emails that it's going to reveal my bedtime then, but I won't do that.
With common, a lot of working practices, NES Fircroft, for example, a lot of our work is done on a hybrid model, so some from an office, some working from home. With other models, it can be entirely working from home. But how do you feel that working from home affects work-life balance?
I think it can make it more difficult to achieve that balance, because people can fall into habits which don't help to set boundaries, set parameters. And one of the most important things for me is that people ideally shouldn't be working in an environment where they would normally associate that environment with relaxing. So, for example, out of their bedroom, or maybe out of their living room. Now, obviously, not everybody has that luxury. And I know during the pandemic, a lot of people really did struggle with that because they were just living in their bedroom, living, working, breathing, just there constantly. So if people can't do that, I think at the very least they need to be, rigid with, right, well, I'm going to close my laptop at this time of the day and move on from that. And I think it's important to have a break from that workspace as well. So at lunchtime, just step away from your screen, go and do something good for the soul, whether that's cooking a nice lunch, whether it's going for a walk around the block. I take my dogs for a walk, for example. It's just good to kind of give your mind that little break from doing your work. I think when you're working remotely as well, it can be more difficult to stay in touch with your colleagues, your manager, if you're not consciously making an effort to have that regular touch point and communication. So building time into your diary on a regular basis just to catch up is really important. And you might not need it every week, but I think if you've carved that time out in your diary, then at least you're prioritizing that as and when you need it.
So it can be hard to discuss work-life balance if you're finding the workload, a little bit overwhelming. As someone who's an employee, but also in a more managerial role, how do you think we should discuss work-life balance in the workplace?
I think it's important that it stays as a topic on the agenda at all times. It's not something that anyone should shy away from. There's no shame in seeking help if people feel like they need help. You're not going to get help if you don't ask for it, because people might not necessarily know that you're struggling. So like we said before, if you are finding yourself struggling, then you need to have that open and honest conversation. It's really not something to be ashamed of. Some people need a bit more structure, a little bit more guidance in their day. It's important to allow them to ask for that. Like, you don't want to just make that decision for them, but as long as you're giving them the platform to have that conversation and they know there's no judgment there, then that's the best thing you can do for people, really. It's important to take stock of culture. That's whether you're interviewing for a new role. I think you should deliberately take time in that interview to ask your interviewer what the culture's like, try and unearth, the reality of that. And if you're in a current job and you feel like actually the problem isn't being addressed, and this idea of burnout, feeling overwhelmed and stressed all the time is starting to be normalised, well, that might be when you want to start having a look at getting a different job that aligns a little bit more with the balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So just on a similar note then, what can companies and managers do to kind of better help their employees manage work-life balance?
Tell them it's okay to ask for help. Make sure you've got regular catch-ups in your diary. So, for example, in our team, everyone with reporting lines, make sure that they have a formal catch-up at least once a week. And it's not always needed, but it's there if it is needed. So having that dedication, that commitment to having that time one-on-one is really important. And it's all about what the individual needs, really. If someone is struggling with their workload, their kind of day-to-day activity, it's important to take a look at why that might be. Maybe it is that they simply have got too much to do, or maybe it's that actually they're not sure how to prioritize this and they're just feeling a bit overwhelmed. So that's where you need to consider putting more structure into their day. But it's important to trust that your employees can manage their own workload, because we don't want to be in a micromanagement situation. That's not good for anyone's mental health or progression. But if someone's coming to you saying, I need some help, that's an entirely different thing. I also think it is really important to lead by example. So you're never going to find me calling my colleagues, my employees, when they're on leave. It's just not going to happen. And likewise, they're not going to call me if I'm sat on a beach somewhere. It's just that is not an expectation. That's not what's going to happen. And because we have such good communication on a regular basis, no one's ever in a situation really where they don't know what's going on with other workload, because you've got that good communication, that good rapport. And in the interests of keeping everything as proactive and as streamlined, as efficient as possible, we should look at opportunities to try and improve output and just manage that workload easier as a team. And that should be a continuous conversation during these catch-ups.
So yes, thank you very much, Lauren, for taking the time to chat with us today on this topic.
You're very welcome. I hope it provides you with something valuable.
Hopefully today we've been able to shed some light on how to strike the right work-life balance. But if you find yourself in need of some more career advice, then check out our other podcasts through SoundCloud, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can also head to our YouTube channel at NES Fircroft or visit nesfircroft.com, where you can also find our latest vacancies and be first in line for future jobs in this expanding industry. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.